So what did the Israeli government know and when? It's a question almost no one in media is asking, but we are. I'm investigative journalist Ben Swan, and this is Reckoning Israel and Gaza. On October 7th, Hamas was able to carry out its shocking terror attack against Israel, despite Israel's intelligence, military, and security apparatus, commonly considered to be the best in the world. Bearing in mind Israel's incredibly sophisticated and capable defenses and brigades of trained IDF soldiers stationed near the Gaza border, the scale and the operational success of the Al-Aqsa flood attack surprised even Hamas. Hamas representative Ali Baraka explained to the Washington Post the ease with which Israel's entire security apparatus disintegrated, saying, quote, "We were expecting to get a smaller number of hostages and return to Gaza, but the Israeli army collapsed in front of us. What were we to do?" So how did October 7th happen? In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu quickly tweeted, then deleted a statement saying that he had absolutely no prior knowledge of this coming attack, saying, quote, "Under no circumstances and at no stage was Prime Minister Netanyahu warned of war intentions on the part of Hamas." The tweet said that before it was promptly deleted. Why did Netanyahu's team delete that tweet? Did he in fact have intelligence that there would be an attack by Hamas? Well, the evidence seems to point to only one answer: yes. Foreign security services, Israeli security services, and the Israeli public all knew that Hamas was planning a violent cross-border incursion where they would attempt to overrun and attack the kibbutz communities in southern Israel, and then take prisoners back to Gaza. And they also knew when. But it happened anyway. 10 days before the attack, and then again 3 days before the attack, Egypt's intelligence officials actually sent repeated warnings to the highest levels of the Israeli government. In one of those warnings, Egypt's premier intelligence minister, General Abbas Kamel, personally called Netanyahu and warned him that Hamas was about to do, quote, "something unusual, a terrible operation." Unnamed Egyptian officials told Ynet News that they were shocked by Netanyahu's indifference to the news. But Israel didn't have to trust or believe Egypt, because actually most of the warnings of the October 7th attack came from Israeli civilians and the Israeli military itself. The civilians and soldiers who brought these emergency warnings to the military were ignored, and in some cases, strangely enough, threatened with legal action. So let's go all the way back to 2022 and then work our way forward to the days before the October 7th attacks. In 2022, the IDF, through confidential sources or spies in Gaza, actually obtained the detailed Hamas Al-Aqsa flood attack plans. Codenamed Jericho Wall by Israel, that incursion plan called for a barrage of rockets to begin the attack, and then for gunmen to pour into Israel en masse via paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, and then take hostages back into Gaza. All of it, every bit of that, happened on October 7th. Hamas followed its own blueprints that Israel already had in its possession with shocking precision. So Israel literally had the attack blueprints. But were they taken seriously by the IDF? Again, yes. The plans were diligently studied. In fact, a presentation on the planned attack was given to senior officers in the IDF's Gaza division. The presentation concluded with this sentence, quote, "This invasion constitutes the gravest threat that IDF forces are facing in the defense of Israel." So in response to all of this, did Israel's intelligence apparatus actually enhance or beef up their surveillance of the Hamas militants along the Gaza border? Well, actually, not only is the answer no, but stunningly, they did the exact opposite. They decided to entirely stop monitoring Hamas's handheld radio traffic because they saw it as a waste of effort. Even though during that same time, in 2022, Israelis living in the kibbutz communities near the Gaza border, most of whom have some type of military training because of Israel's mandatory IDF service laws, they were, according to Israeli media, picking up clear evidence that Hamas was practicing the breaching of the fence and conquering kibbutzim and seizing hostages and destroying everything in their path. Then in April of 2023, again, this is still 6 months before the attack, the IDF, according to Israeli media, actually did something even more surprising. They restricted the ability of Israeli citizens living along the border to monitor Hamas's wireless traffic. In September of 2023, that's less than a month before the attack, the head of the IDF's Devil's Advocate intelligence unit, which challenges prevailing narratives within Israel's military, twice alerted senior decision makers in both the army and the political spheres about Hamas's plans for a large-scale cross-border military operation. He reiterated those warnings in person at intelligence branch strategic assessment sessions on September 26th and September 27th. This is just days before the attack. During this period, again, just days before the Al-Aqsa flood attack, Israeli civilians residing in the kibbutzim near the Gaza border were witnessing with their own eyes and ears constant and enormous Hamas training exercises. The army reportedly turned a blind eye. One of these Israelis, Ben Shoshan, worked as a tour guide in the southeastern Israeli region surrounding Gaza. In a radio interview just days before October 7th, she remarked, quote, "Hamas has been training for weeks right up against the border, sometimes in massive numbers. I tried to warn the officers, but they told me I didn't know anything and that I was safe." On October 3rd, a journalist for Israeli Public Radio tweeted and made crystal clear that the bizarre and violent Hamas drills that were taking place on the Gaza side of the border were evident to everyone who was living alongside that border, including the Israeli military. The Islamic Jihad organization started noisy exercises very close to the border with missile launches, simulating breaking into Israel and kidnapping soldiers. Didi Fold, a resident of Netiv Hatara, said it was significantly closer than previous times. The children wake up and they ask what's going on. There are explosions, booms. It is not similar to previous exercises. So it was clear to everyone that Hamas wasn't only planning to do something horrible, but it was also clear exactly what that horrible and evil thing was. According to a female IDF soldier who spoke to Israel's Channel 12 news program, she was constantly trying to warn her superiors about the gravity of the Hamas training exercises. And she was threatened with legal action, saying, quote, "We were told that if we continue to harass on this issue, you will stand trial." So, Egypt knew, the Israeli military knew, and the Israeli civilians knew. And yet 2 days before October 7th, the Israeli military took 2 entire commando brigades, that's around 100 soldiers, away from the soon-to-be breached locations of the Gaza border and sent them to the other side of the country, to the West Bank village of Huwara. Despite no Hamas presence being in Huwara, and despite there being giant Israeli dance parties taking place right along the same border fence where violent, escalating, and obvious Hamas drills of breaching and kidnapping were taking place. The Hamas attacks were violent and brutal, and they've been likened to tragic events such as the September 11th attacks or even the Holocaust, which makes it strange that Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his party have at times described these attacks as somewhat of a political gift. Nassim Vaturi, a member of Netanyahu's party in the Knesset, referred to the attack as sort of a gift from God because they are being used to justify the current ongoing war, stating, quote, "We were meant to fight this war against Hamas, as is happening now, and luckily for us, it came from the heavens." Well, back in January, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained that Israel did not have the domestic or international support to invade or destroy Gaza. He said the October 7th Hamas attack solved both of those problems for him. Listen to this.
"We couldn't get the domestic consensus to make such a definitive solution to the problem of Hamas. That is, no one would agree across the Israeli public to go in and basically destroy Hamas, go throughout Gaza and destroy Hamas. We didn't have the international consensus either. Nobody would understand why are we doing it. Both conditions were created because of the Hamas savage attack on Israel on October 7th.
Did the Israeli military, the Israeli intelligence community, and the political leadership of Israel allow this ghastly attack to happen to justify wiping out the population of Gaza?
Welcome, truth seekers and freedom lovers. This is Makia with the Freedom Articles. This is video number 237 on Thursday, July 31st, 2025. And the breaking news today is that there is an Israeli soldier who has testified to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, that he was given a very strange order on the morning of October 7th, specifically between 5:20 a.m. and 9 a.m. And these almost 4 hours was the period when Hamas was allowed to attack. And it was a stand-down order. It was an order not to continue the normal patrol of that area. Basically, this guy's testimony is in Hebrew, but we do have an English translation. I'm just going to play a little bit of this so you can see what he's actually saying here.
והסמג"ד שלי, ניר בוינפלג, שגם הוא נפצע קשה, וברוך השם הוא שרד, פתאום עולה בקשר בהודעה מוזרה. כל התחנות, לא יודע למה, לא יודע איך, משהו בסגנון הזה, אין סיור בגדר עד 9 בבוקר.
באיזה שעה זה?
5:20 בבוקר.
כל תחנות נשארים כאן משנה, אז מבחינת קרקע ואויב אין לנו דברים משמעותיים. מבחינת כוחותינו יצאה הנחיה מהחטיבה שעד השעה 9 בבוקר מול הערכת המצב, אף כלי לא מגיע לבורמה. אני חוזר שוב, עד 9 בבוקר ואל מול הערכת המצב, אף כלי לא לבורמה.
Okay, so his supervisor gets an order saying no patrols, no vehicles going down to Burma. And he thought it was a very strange message. He couldn't really understand it. But, this is all about, it's another one of these false flag operations where it's made to happen or allowed to happen. There's often a blurring of the lines between those two things. But the people high up knew this was happening, and so they have to remove the ordinary defensive procedures, the standard operating procedures that would have stopped something like this or would have made it not so bad. But they wanted it to be bad. They wanted a lot of people killed because it was the excuse they needed to launch the genocide of Gaza. There's an article on the Cradle that goes into more depth with this guy's testimony and the implications of it. His name is Shalom Sheet-Rit, and I'm sure that he's not the only one that saw something weird and something off that didn't make sense about what happened that morning with all the Hamas fighters being allowed in so easily past one of the most technologically defended fences or gates of walls in the entire world. And the stand down order for 6 or 7 hours where there was basically no Israeli military response to Hamas fighters just wandering around inside of Israeli territory. And then just as a reminder, we did have several admissions from people high up in Israel, in the Israeli military. We had this guy, Colonel Nof Erez, who said that there was the Hannibal Directive given, which means that the Israeli army is going to kill its own citizens to prevent them being taken captive or hostage. And the initial figure was 1,400. That got downgraded to 1,200 people that died that day. But we know that Israel was probably responsible for around 2/3 of it, if not more. And this was just basically an indiscriminate firing upon anyone there, whether they were civilian or military, Israeli or Palestinian. It didn't matter. They were just getting the body count up and killing them. And it actually leads on, this whole story about this testimony of this soldier leads on to another story that just came out. This didn't just came out, but this just came to my attention. This is actually from 2023 in December. It says, recent investigation by Israeli Channel 12, featuring accounts from settlers, affirms that Israeli tanks were situated inside the Be'eri settlement on October 7th. The investigation reveals that they targeted houses even when dozens of people were inside. So yeah, Hamas does not have an air force or tanks. So if there's tanks in this area, they have to belong to the Israeli military. There's no one else around that they would belong to. And so when the tanks are firing on people in here, that is the Israeli military firing on people there, its own citizens.